President Cyril Ramaphosa will this afternoon launch the inaugural Women's Economic Assembly. That hybrid event will be held in Johannesburg, and it puts together government, the private sector and women's organizations as well as entrepreneurs. It follows government's announcement that 40% of public sector procurement will go to women-owned enterprises. Let's unpack this story for you now. Namhla Mniki is the Deputy Director General in the Presidency for Women Economic Empowerment. She joins us now via our video link in Johannesburg. Namhla, it's great to have you with us on the show this morning. Such an incredibly important initiative. I think as a start, can you outline for us, going into this launch today, what are some of the commitments that the President already has and from which sectors?
Thank you so much, Michelle, for having me. And indeed, I think it is a transformational moment for this country. The Women's Economic Assembly is a gathering of multiple stakeholders, from government to civil society to women business associations and the private sector. And essentially, it intends to ensure that women have opportunities in supply chains, in industry, both in terms of, agriculture, all the 17 industries essentially highlighted in our economic recovery strategy. Today, in this first event of its kind, we expect to see heads of industry and ministers in our public service who are going to be coming in, making very specific commitments around how they will actually promote women in their supply chains. And so one of the key areas we're going to be looking out for is, what are you doing as an industry to ensure that the ownership of women and the leadership of women in that particular sector is increasing? And we expect that at least we will have representation from steel, from energy, from automotive sector, from FMCG sectors, and agricultural sectors. And those heads of industries are going to be actually telling us their funding commitments. They are going to be telling us the initiatives they will be driving over the long term to ensure that women in supply chains are actually participating.
So for the moment, this is a pledge that these industries will be making. I mean, are we on the road now to actually sanctioning industries that don't make commitments in terms of women leadership in their particular sectors?
Actually, I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised today, because a number of these industries, when we began to engage with them as the Women of South Africa, we realized that many of them had gender transformation plans already and that they had begun to do initiatives. What was missing, I think, was two elements. Number one, mainstreaming across all industries, but number two, massification. And so a lot of the times the approach still was to use a project perspective as opposed to a systemic perspective. I don't think we're at the stage of sanctioning, but given the positive reflections and the responses we got from industry, my suspicion is that we are building a community of collaboration, and that once we begin to encourage each other as the South African society to transform our economy, we are going to be spending more time congratulating each other for the impact we're making as opposed to sanctioning each other.
And you'll forgive me for being cynical this morning.
Absolutely.
But, in so much as another important issue in our country is concerned, and that is the representation of black South Africans on the boards of the big corporates in our country. The commitment is one thing. The acting on that commitment, as we've seen in practice, is an entirely different thing.
Absolutely. And you know what? I don't blame you for being cynical, because actually the challenges that women are actually facing in this country are daunting. And one of the examples, as you say, is leadership. When we began to look, for instance, at some of the industries, we were finding that the executives are still particularly male and particularly white, as it were. And I think what we're doing today is we want to shine the light on what is going well, but also we want to highlight. We don't want to be pretending. So we want to highlight where the gaps are. One of the things we decided very early on is that we need a monitoring platform and a monitoring instrument, so that if an industry announces that by next year you will see that there's greater women representation in our board, we're going to come back and say we've noted that commitment. The public of South Africa has access to that commitment, and we want to see you come back next year to actually tell us what progress you've made. So one of the things that are really important is to note that this assembly is not an event. It's an initiative by the South African women to transform our economy year on year. Every single year over the long term, we're going to be saying around ownership and leadership. What are you doing? Around ecosystems of support, in other words, training and supporting women, funding, etc. What are you doing? Around employment of women and representation of women across management and all the way through the value chain. What are you doing? Around engaging the rural economies and the township economies. What are you doing? As you can hear me rattling all of these indicators out, you can see that we've really thought quite carefully about what are the 6 points we are looking for in each industry that have a model that will tell us that each industry is making a difference. And policy interventions becomes a really important aspect around that as well. So we are also holding the public sector accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. That monitoring tool certainly is the kind of thing we want to see at the launch of events like the one that you've just described this morning, Namhla. In terms of the women's organizations, the entrepreneurs who will be taking part, what can you tell us?
So we have literally a broad sweep of women business associations all across South Africa, including your traditional business associations that have really been coming on board to support us. We, over and above, began to deal with specific women in specific sectors. We are going to have well over 1,000 entrepreneurs that are going to be joining us online, and quite a number of them that are going to be on site. The message I want to leave for South African women, particularly those that are in business, is that we are beginning a new wave and a new season in our country, and it's a season where we are quite intentional about creating opportunities. And we are inviting you on board to walk with us on this journey, to say, if you are in mining, get together and get organized, such as the women in mining, so that we can begin to work together about what needs to happen in your specific industry. We're finding that there are common threads which are gaps across industries, but there are also very specific things. So the challenges of the automotive sector are not the same as the ones in the mining sector. And the organization of those women in those sectors helps us to begin to understand what is it that we need to change in each of those sectors.
Yeah, and this is an important story that no doubt we're going to keep our eyes on. Thanks very much indeed, Namhla Mniki, for your time this morning, outlining really the importance of today's event for us. She's the Deputy DG in the Presidency for Women Economic Empowerment. President Cyril Ramaphosa this afternoon launching that inaugural Women's Economic Assembly. Thanks for your time this morning.